Violence keeps escalating, with 24 states and our nation's capital now under the protection of the National Guard. These are just a few of the images that our nation witnessed on Sunday. Despite orders to clear the streets, you'll see them in a moment, police in riot gear still confronting thousands of protesters. Earlier, mobs of looters and vandals continued their criminal activity, invading and destroying stores in broad daylight, even as America's businesses struggle to recover from the lockdowns and deadly tide of the coronavirus. You are looking live at Washington, D.C., where police have had their hands full tonight, and we're told more than 50 Secret Service officers have been injured this evening, far more than any previous night, with bottles and Molotov cocktails being thrown in their direction. We can tell you that in Minneapolis earlier today, the driver of a semi-truck was accused of trying to plow his vehicle through a crowd of demonstrators, and the wrath is no longer confined to big cities. Smaller communities such as Fargo, North Dakota, and Lincoln, Nebraska are also seeing mass crowds joining the March for Justice and Reform, the turbulence rivaling demonstrations of the civil rights and Vietnam eras of half a century ago. The nation's capital, as we mentioned, has been the scene of violent confrontations between police and protesters, with fires burning and skirmishes breaking out, some of the battles exploding just steps from the White House. At this hour, D.C., like so many other U.S. cities, is under curfew and under the extra protection of the National Guard. And Fox News correspondent Kevin Corke has been in the crowds and the chaos for hours. Kevin, it looks like things have calmed down a bit where you are now.
Thankfully, we're in a staging area. As you look just over my shoulder, you can see a number of Metropolitan Police cruisers. They are staged here. A little more than about 15 minutes ago, we saw literally a dozen vans, large personnel carriers, all moving toward the White House grounds. Where we are is actually about 4 blocks away from the complex itself. In fact, when we swing around here, go ahead and swing around to your left. You can see a cruiser coming our way. You can see the Treasury building, which just slightly there to the left. And if you continue directly straight down this street, you would literally run right into the White House. Unfortunately, earlier tonight, dramatic pictures from just outside the White House. Certainly Lafayette Park was packed. I've been here since at least 4:30 Eastern time, and we saw hundreds of people in the park, mostly peaceful. Then the protests got a little bit more, let's just say dicey, if you will, allow me. But then as the night fell, unfortunately, we saw fires, including a fire in the basement at the historic St. John's Church. Since then, we've seen the fire trucks finally be able to move down H Street and put out some of the blazes. We still do see people, stragglers, it's well past curfew, moving about the street. But I can tell you, at least from where we are standing, things are a lot more calm and a lot more peaceful than they were, let's just say, an hour ago. Back to you.
Kevin, I don't know if you can speak to this, but we have a report that there is information that some of these radical groups have been planting vehicles in different portions of the city, different cities, but including Washington, D.C., and stashing incendiary devices inside those vehicles and then going and retrieving those devices as things escalate and using them in their attacks. Have you seen any evidence of that, or have you heard those reports?
I've heard those reports. I've not seen that personally, but I can definitely tell you. You kind of get a sense, and you've covered these in your great experience here on the ground, all around the country. You get a sense for what a general protest looks like. You kind of get a sense for what the average protest might be about. I've done this many, many times. But what's different in this particular circumstance is I really got the sense that there was a group, mostly young males, that came in late, really late, at 11 o'clock, 10:30 Eastern, and they were armed with hammers, and they were basically setting fires everywhere they could. The AFL-CIO building. They set fire to the Teachers Federation building. They knocked out glass everywhere. I mean, I'm not kidding. I walked 4 blocks from the White House over here, and literally every single shop along the way was hit. And it's really a devastating thing to see. My point is, I think anarchists are at least partially responsible for what we're seeing here. You see lots of graffiti supporting that, and it's a terrible sight. Back to you.
Kevin, on this program, we called a couple nights ago, we said that it appeared to be domestic terrorism. This certainly seems to be organized, and these groups are certainly terrorizing portions of some of our major cities tonight. Kevin, we appreciate your efforts on the ground, and we'll get back to you as news warrants. We turn now to the West Coast and the City of Angels here, the scene of considerable conflict and property damage, protests and violence forcing street closings, and much more. Los Angeles County has imposed a 12-hour curfew that began at 6 p.m. and runs until 6 a.m., with the mayor, Eric Garcetti, issuing a warning to those instigating violence, saying, quote, "To those who are acting criminally and looting, we see what you are doing, and we will arrest you." Fox News correspondent Jeff Paul has been witnessing the mayhem. Jeff, describe the scene where you're at tonight.
Yeah, Rick, it has been a very tough day here for people who live and work around Santa Monica. And it started much earlier in the afternoon with a very peaceful march and protest here in Santa Monica, just off of 4th Street and Santa Monica. And you could hear that water running. There was a fire out here earlier. All this glass just shattered on the ground. And as we move a little further down, that scene is repeated over and over again. You have a jewelry store right here that was broken into.
Pessoal, eu vou parar, eu vou descansar, eu já estou esquentando muito a cabeça. Tá horrível essa internet, acho que eles estão boicotando não somente o ForceTube, porque há pouco tempo atrás eu não podia abrir nenhum browser. Tá horrível e tá num looping, tá travando, tá horrível mesmo. É uma frustração tremenda. Caiu num looping, tá horrível isso.
Told us essentially they feel like they have things somewhat under control. There are still some stragglers that are trying to kind of just pull up and do a quick smash and grab. And we're also seeing LA County sheriffs out here, and we did a little bit earlier see the National Guard floating around. Rick?
Jeff, we know that there were 533 arrests in Los Angeles on Friday night. Do you have numbers from last night and any sign of mass arrests this evening?
Yeah, I believe in Los Angeles the number was just under 400 arrests last night. We also know that one officer